Hello, I am a teacher. I teach at a university and I am going back to teaching very, very soon. In fact, tomorrow is my first teaching session for the term, and I recently read a book that gave me that back to school feeling, and so I thought I would do a whole recommendation video on books that give me that back to school feeling. Now I should specify that for me, back to school always was exciting because I would get to see my friends again and I would get to buy new stationery, which is always a good time, but also quite anxiety inducing because I was bullied in school and I didn't have a huge group of friends at school, and school wasn't always the most pleasant thing for me personally, so you'll see that theme throughout the recommendations that I have for you. But the book that sparked it all is The Devil Makes Three by Tori Bovolino, which I read a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, and this is actually the Illumicrate edition, so this is an exclusive cover. But this story follows two perspectives. The first perspective, Tess, is a student who is working at the school's library, and she also has a job in a diner as well, and the library is basically a library for occult texts, so grimoires, that kind of thing. And the other perspective is Elliot, who is a magic user and is going into the library to conduct some research, and they find a hidden book which they open and they end up accidentally releasing some kind of dark entity which starts stalking them. So it's in a school library, not in a school. Most of the rest of these, but not all of the rest of these recommendations, are kind of have a school setting in them. This one doesn't, because it actually happens at the end of summer, so kind of it was happening at the same time that I was reading it, and it just gave me those kind of dark academia vibes, but it was very engaging and I felt very immersed in the story. It was a little bit creepy and unsettling in places, but in a good way. It didn't scare me, and I'm a bit of a scaredy cat, so this one just gave me that feeling. I don't know how else to describe it, but I do highly recommend this one. It's a new publication. I listened to the audiobook through Scribed and I highly recommend that as well, but I just overall recommend this book in general, and it is what led me to want to recommend these other books. So the first one that I'm going to recommend to you is one that I actually only read for the first time this year, although it's been out for a long time, so I'm definitely in no way new to this particular party, but it is The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater, and this again is not actually, well, it's got a school setting for part of it, but it's not really a school-based story. We follow multiple perspectives. The main one is a girl named Blue, she has kind of special powers, and basically those powers allow her to amplify the powers of others, and her family are basically seers. They can kind of sense and sometimes see spirits in the world around them, and Blue gets kind of mixed up with the Raven Boys, who are from a local private school where everybody's very rich, and it's quite typical dark academia in that way, but once again it's quite dark and there are mysterious elements, and there are those few select scenes which take place at school when we're in some of the boys' perspectives. Next up I have a middle grade option for you, and this one does very much take place at a school for the vast majority of the book, but once again we've got a bit of a mystery element here, and that is Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston. This one follows Amari, whose brother has gone missing, and the authorities have essentially given up and presumed that he's not going to come back, but Amari doesn't believe believe that. And when she finds a suitcase that suggests his potential whereabouts, she decides to go off in search of him, and that leads her to a magical school. And it's very, again, mysterious, not quite so dark as the first two recommendations, because of course this one is a middle grade, but it's still really fun and fast paced, and you get a little bit of that discovery of the school and the magic, which is always a really good time, and you get to discover new friends and all of that kind of excitement of being young, but also the anxiety of being young and joining a new school. Next up, I have The Empire of Dreams by Ray Carson, although this particular recommendation does come with a caveat, because you shouldn't really read it before reading the Fire and Thorns trilogy by Ray Carson, although I recommend that trilogy as well. I thought it was very good, but not necessarily for the back to school feeling. But this one does take place not at a school, but the protagonist is in training to basically be part of the Royal Guard, and so there's lots of training sequences, there's lots of her dealing with not necessarily being accepted by the other members of this training squad, and she's very much cast out and having to deal with some difficult times with her peers but also with her family. And I found particularly the difficulties she was having with her peers quite relatable, and there's again a little bit of a mystery involved as well. We see a lot of really great character development in this one too, so I really love the original trilogy, and I thought that this was a great kind of spin-off or almost continuation, because it takes place after the events of the original trilogy, but it follows different characters. Then we have a couple that I didn't personally love, but I do think have that very back to school feeling vibe about them. The first one is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. I don't have my copy, I gave it to my sister. This one does very much take place at school, specifically an arts college, and the characters that we are following are attending the theatre programme of this particular art college. At the very beginning of the story, we're introduced to a character who is just being released from prison, where he has just served 10 years for the murder of a classmate, and the book is him telling the story of what really happened. Also, this particular theatre programme that they're on is focused solely on Shakespeare, so they only do Shakespeare productions. So if you like Shakespeare or you're familiar with Shakespeare, which I sort of am but not massively, then I think you'd like this book, because there's a lot of references to Shakespeare. And again, another mystery based story, sort of. Maybe all of these are all of them yeah, pretty much, apart from two, the last two. These are basically have all got a mystery element, which is something that I'm only just realising now. So I don't know, take from that what you will. The whole of this book takes place at the school during term time, and it follows a group of very closely knit friends. It's a college, so they are all living together as well, and they're dealing with academics, they're dealing with friend drama, they're dealing with this mystery element as well. So it definitely has those dark academia, back to school vibes. The next one that I want to recommend, that again I didn't especially love myself, but I do think that it's a really good recommendation for that back to school feeling, is The Ravens by Danielle Page and Cass Morgan. This one follows characters who are in a sorority at a university, and they're basically witches. And again, there's a mystery for them to unfurl, but the kind of main character that we follow is joining this sorority, but she doesn't really, or hasn't previously really believed in magic, even though her mum does, and she's starting to realise that maybe there's something to all of this, and she doesn't really fit in with the sorority. She's not necessarily welcomed into the group, and as I mentioned, that for me feels very reminiscent of that back to school feeling. She's also joining university, which is part of the back to school thing. It's not always back to the same school, it's just back to education, and you might be starting somewhere new, and that can be scary. You have to make your mark and make new friends, and this book really gives that a vibe, and of course there's lots of drama for them to sort out as well. Next up we have Legendborn by Tracy Dion. This one also takes place at a university, but our protagonist is actually high school aged, so she's in an accelerated program, so she's finishing off high school at college. I don't really know how that works. I didn't even know if that's really a thing, but that's what's happening in this book. And so our protagonist is not only dealing with the fact that she is joining a new school, but she's also dealing with the fact that she's considerably younger than her peers. She's also dealing with the fact that her mother unfortunately has just passed away, and then she witnesses a magical attack. And she didn't believe in magic prior to that, but now the evidence is right before her eyes, and so she kind of also gets swept up in this secret society of sorts, and there's a mystery to solve. I feel like a broken record in this video, but there's another mystery to solve. Once again, we have a university setting. We have a character who is having to make friends when she's very, very different from her peers, and she's also having to deal with a lot of personally very difficult situations in her life. So I thought the writing of this one was fantastic. It gets shelved in YA. I think it could easily sit in adult as well, because some of the themes are quite adult, but they are dealt with in an approachable way for a YA reader. So I think it is appropriate for YA readers, but I also think it can be very easily enjoyed by adult readers too. Next up is a book that is kind of at the other end of the age spectrum. So it's categorised as YA, but I think it could just as easily sit in middle grade, to be honest, and that is The Rhythmist by Brandon Sanderson. Once again, this is set at a school this time, a magic school, or a half magic school and half not magic school, and our protagonist desperately wants to be a magic user, but he's not. He can't use magic, and so he's in the half of the school that is not for magic users, which is not where he would prefer to be. And then there are a series of disappearances that he gets involved in investigating. So once again, we have a mystery here. The magic system in this one is really interesting because it involves the drawing of things on the ground with chalk, and the kind of magical antagonist are called chalklings, which are basically drawings of little creatures that come to life and attack people. So it's a really different magic system. Word of warning with this one, this is the first book in a series, but it's currently the only book, and I don't know whether Sanderson necessarily plans to go back to these anytime soon. His focus is on the Cosmere and the Skyward series at the moment, but I still really enjoyed this one for what it was, and it definitely has that back to school feeling because once again, well for me, because once again we have a character who doesn't really fit in with his direct peers because he doesn't want to be part of that group. He wants to be part of the other group, but he doesn't fit with the other group because he's not a magic user, and so he's not a part of their class. So definitely relatable, at least for me. Next up we have one that actually doesn't take place at a school or a college or a university, although it takes place adjacent to one, and that is The Reckless Afterlife of Harriet Stoker by Lauren James. This one, as I mentioned, takes place adjacent to a university. So Harriet Stoker is attending university, but she decides to go to this old, run-down, abandoned, dangerous building, and she unfortunately dies and comes back as a ghost and discovers that there are lots of ghosts living in this particular building, and she is trying to come to the bottom of what is going on with all of the ghosts that are here at this particular building. And although this doesn't take place at the university, there is that very freshers feeling to it, because it's lots of young adults all in one place. They're dead, but they're still partying, and then there's a mystery to solve, so we're hearing the same thing again there. But Harriet doesn't necessarily fit in, but she doesn't really want to, and she makes some very interesting decisions, and the university is just kind of across the way, so it definitely gave me that vibe of being at a university, even though it actually wasn't at the university, because all of the students, or all of the ghosts, sorry, that are there were students, and they're now dead. So I really like Lauren James anyway. I think she's a massively underrated author. Her writing is fantastic, her plot twists are great, so I highly recommend this one, and it gives you that spooky vibe, which I also think fits with the whole back to school feeling, because the weather is starting to turn, or at least on this side of the globe it is, in this hemisphere. So yeah. Then a very different tone, and not a mystery, so hooray. In fact, the last two on this list are not mysteries, so hooray for that. We're done with the mystery type plot lines. We have Heartstopper by Alice Oseman, who happens to be Lauren's best friend, by the way, or one of, anyway, so that's a fun little bit of trivia for you there. This one is a graphic novel. As you can probably tell, you've probably heard of this, but it does take place at a secondary school in the UK, and I mean, I could say this for basically any of Alice Oseman's books, but they really just make me feel like secondary school in the UK. There's just something about it that is just so recognisable to me as a Brit. Maybe that wouldn't translate as well to anyone from anywhere else in the world, but it definitely makes me feel like I was back at school. It follows two boys, Nick and Charlie, who basically fall in love, and they have to deal with the fact that they are two boys falling in love in secondary school, and that teenagers are not always kind, and it was just very relatable to me. And it does take place in a school, and I think it does take place at the very beginning, or at least volume 1 takes place at the very beginning of the year, the school year as well, so very, very reminiscent of back to school. And then finally, another one that kind of could sit in either YA or middle grade, but I definitely would say more so YA, and that is Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. Yes, we have 2 Brandon Sanderson books on this list. Nobody's surprised, you should be used to this by now. This one follows Spencer, who desperately wants to go to pilot school so that she can join the Air Force and join the fight against the Krell, which is an alien species that is attacking the planet that humans are now living on, and she isn't particularly accepted by those who are in the admissions team or by the students at this particular flight school, but she is determined, and she doesn't care whether she's going to have friends or not. She just wants to do the damn thing, and she does the damn thing. There are training sequences in here, there are relationships being formed in here. It's a really fun and easy read. The 3rd book in this quartet is coming out in November, so this is a really good time to pick this one up, because you can read books 1, 2 and 3 pretty much back to back, 1 month at a time if you would like to. I will be rereading this in October, I think, and then rereading Starsight, which is book 2, in November, in readiness for book 3 coming out, so very excited for that. Also, the audiobook of this series or the audiobooks of this series are fantastic, so highly recommend those, and I definitely recommend this one for that feeling of not fitting in and being a little bit angry at the world, which I think is relatable for a lot of people who went through their teens and didn't necessarily fit in with their peers. So that's my final recommendation for this video. I realised that it was definitely on a specific theme. No, I wasn't solving murders and mysteries when I was in school. I did read some crime fiction and mysteries in school, so I don't know, maybe there's something in that too. But hopefully you enjoyed these recommendations. Let me know what back to school means for you, how it makes you feel, and I will see if I can recommend some books in the comments that will give you that kind of feeling. Or you can make use of Ponderful Books, which is my book recommendation service. It will be linked down in the description. But that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button, and I hope to see you here again soon. Thanks, bye.